This is the hemisection of head and neck. This is the cranial cavity. This is the nasal cavity. This is the oral cavity. This is the vertebral column. These are the vertebra. This is the brain stem, cerebellum, and this is the spinal cord. Now the parts.
Here about that.
এটা ভিডিও করতেছি. This is the nasal cavity. This is the vestibule of the nasal cavity. After that, this is the antrum of the middle meatus. And behind the nasal concha, this is the posterior nasal aperture. This is the superior nasal concha, middle nasal concha, inferior nasal concha. And if the conchas are covered by the mucous membrane, that is called the turbinate. This is the superior turbinate, middle turbinate, inferior turbinate. This is the frontal air sinus. This is the sphenoid air sinus. The space upward from the superior nasal concha is the sphenoethmoidal recess. Here opens the opening of the sphenoidal air sinus. This is the space superior nasal meatus, space below the superior nasal concha, and space below the middle nasal concha. There is this is the middle nasal meatus, and the space between the inferior nasal concha, there is the inferior nasal meatus. In the superior nasal meatus, the posterior ethmoidal air cells opening of the posterior ethmoidal air cell, and in the middle meatus, there is the various opening for frontal air sinus, middle ethmoidal air sinus, maxillary air sinus. In the inferior nasal meatus, there is the opening from nasolacrimal duct, and in the posterior part, in the nasopharynx, there is the opening for pharyngotympanic tube. This is the tubal elevation. This is the salpingopharyngeal membrane, and this is the salpingopalatal membrane. This is the nasal cavity in the viscera. This is the sphenoidal air sinus. This one is the sphenoidal air sinus. This is the frontal air sinus. This is the superior nasal concha. This is the middle nasal concha. This is the inferior nasal concha. The space between the superior and middle nasal concha is the superior nasal meatus. And if we reflect the middle nasal concha, we can see the middle nasal meatus, and this is the bulla ethmoidalis. And below the bulla ethmoidalis, there is hiatus semilunaris. This one, hiatus semilunaris. There is opening in the bulla ethmoidalis. There is opening for middle ethmoidal air cell, and in the hiatus semilunaris, there is opening for frontal air sinus, maxillary air sinus, and the anterior ethmoidal air cell. Below the in the inferior nasal meatus, there is opening for nasolacrimal duct and the pharyngotympanic tube. This is the oral cavity. This is the oral cavity proper. This is the vestibule, and this is the oral cavity proper. The vestibule is between the lip and the teeth. The oral cavity proper is marked by the presence of tongue. This is the oral cavity proper, and this is the vestibule, and this is the pharynx. Now we can see the pharynx. Pharynx has three parts: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx is from the base of the skull. This is the sphenoidal air cell. From the below of the sphenoidal air cell, this is the base of the skull. From base of the skull to the lower border of the soft palate, this is the nasopharynx. Yes. And from the lower border of soft palate to the upper border of epiglottis, this is the oropharynx. This is the common passage for food and air. And below the from upper border of epiglottis to the sixth cricoid cartilage. Lower border of the sixth. This is the second vertebral body, because this is the dense. It goes from here to here. And this is the third vertebral body, fourth, fifth, 6 vertebral bodies. So the laryngopharynx should be from here to here. This is the lower part of the cricoid cartilage and the lower border of C6 cervical vertebra. This is the soft palate. This is the hard palate. Here, this is the hard palate. This is the soft palate. So hard palate is formed by the maxillary process of palatal process of maxillary bone and the perpendicular process of palatine bone.
একটাই
Palatine bone.
আর এটা
Soft
horizontal
palate.
process of
হ্যাঁ।
palatine bone
Horizontal process of palatine bone, and this is the soft palate. And this is the tongue. Tongue in muscles holo internal muscle and external muscle. This is the superior intrinsic muscle. This is the inferior intrinsic muscle. In between there is horizontal muscles, and this is the from here to here. I mean full section there is transverse muscles. And this is the genioglossus muscles. It is muscle. It is called the septic muscle of the tongue because it takes the tongue from blocking the airway. This is the tip of genihyoid part of the mandibular bone. This is the upper lip, lower lip. This is the tubal elevation. This is the opening of pharyngotympanic tube. This is the tubal tonsil, and here we can see the nasopharyngeal tonsil. Here we can see the lingual tonsil. It can be seen here, not clearly. This is the epiglottis. This is the vertebral body. This is the second cervical vertebra, and this is the brainstem in the cranial cavity. হ্যাঁ এটা
এই নাকি এখান থেকে ভার্টিব্রা শুরু
এগুলো না, এগুলো বুঝা যাইতেছে না।
এই যে বড় অ্যাটলাস শুরু হইছে
হ্যাঁ এখান থেকে অ্যাটলাস তো এটা।
হ্যাঁ
অ্যাটলাস,
তারপরে এইটা অ্যাটলাস, এটা অ্যাক্সিস,
এটা অ্যাটলাস, এটা অ্যাক্সিসের পার্ট। দিস ইজ অ্যাটলাস,
আগে অ্যাক্সিস হয়,
ডেন্সটা উঠে যায় না।
তাই
দিস ইজ অ্যাটলাস, দিস ইজ অ্যাক্সিস।
ডাবল ডাবল
Atlas axis, Atlas
এবারে না
axis.
বলবি।
Sorry, Atlas axis. This is the cranial cavity. This is the cerebral hemisphere. This is the dural venous. This is the endosteal layer of the dura. This is the meningeal layer of the dura. Meningeal layer of the dura. Here is the pyometers, and this is the dural venous sinuses. This is the cerebellum. This is the corpus callosum. This is the rostrum, genu, body, limb. তারপরে anterior commission and posterior commission present. This is the pineal gland. This is the superior colliculus, inferior colliculus, and this is the cingulate gyrus. This is the cerebellum. This is the space for fourth ventricle. This is the central canal. This is the cerebroaqueduct probably. This is the pons. This is the medulla. This is the elevation for pyramid. This is the midbrain. The midbrain, sorry, I have mistaken here. This should be the axis. This is the axis. This is the atlas. Sorry, and this is the cranial cavity. This is the continuation of spinal cord. This is the spine of the vertebra. This is the ligaments, vertebral ligaments. This is the teeth, and this is the mylohyoid muscle. This is the genihyoid muscles. This is the fibrofatty tissues here present. And this is the cartilaginous part of the nasal cavity, nasal septum present here. This is the roof of the nasal cavity. This is the anterior sloping part, a perpendicular part, and the posterior sloping part. Anterior sloping part is bounded by frontal bone. This is the horizontal part is marked by perpendicular plate of ethmoidal bone. Here the nerves open. And this is the sphenoid bone from the posterior sloping part. This is the sella turcica. Here the pituitary hypophyseal fossa. Here pituitary gland. This one is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland stays here. This is the hypothalamus. This is the thalamus. This is the interthalamic adhesion. The space is the third ventricle. This is the lateral ventricle. The structure is present here. Septum pellucidum. This is the this is the scalpel layer, skin, connective tissue, loose areolar tissue, and these three layers together called scalp proper. And this is the dipole of the cranial skull. Here we can see, you can calculate the vertebrae. This one is the second cervical vertebra. This is third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And and this is the oral cavity. This is the tongue. This is the muscles of the tongue. This is the teeth here. You can see. This is the epiglottis. This one is the epiglottis. Here should be, this should be here, epiglottis. If you want to mark the pharynx from here, this is the base of the skull. This is the sphenoidal air sinus. This should be the base of the skull. From base of the skull to the lower border of soft palate, this part is the nasopharynx. From the lower border of the soft palate to the upper part of the epiglottis, this one should be the oropharynx, the common space for food and air. And from the upper border of epiglottis to lower border of C6 cartilage, this is the cricoid cartilage at lower border and C6 vertebral lower border. This is the laryngopharynx. This is the larynx. This is the laryngeal inlet. This is the trachea. Is hard. The pharynx is not clearly seen here. This is the retropharyngeal space. This is the vertebral canal. This is the meningeal layer of dura mater of the spinal cord, and this is the arch of the spine of the vertebrae, and this is the ligaments for the vertebra. This is the cranial cavity, brain tissue.